via Zoom, and I need to read an official script. So let me just do that. As a preliminary matter, I'm Amanda Fargiano, School Committee Chair. Permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Meg Tyler.
Aye.
Leah Bentley Rafferty.
Aye.
Joe Markey.
Aye.
Nancy Kavanaugh.
Aye.
And staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Carol Kavanaugh.
Aye.
Susan Rothermick.
Here.
Jen Parson.
Here.
Anticipated speakers on the agenda, please respond in the affirmative. Rich Cormier.
Here.
Alan Keller.
Here.
Evan Bishop.
Here.
Great. Good evening. This open meeting of Hopkinton School Committee is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order on March 12, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, specifically tonight, we have more panelists than will comply with the current governor's orders. We are complying with the executive order that suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. All members of the public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The executive order, which you can find posted with the agenda materials for this meeting, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely as long as the public body makes provisions through adequate alternative means to ensure interested members of the public are provided reasonable access to the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comment. For this meeting, the Hopkinton School Committee is convening by Zoom video conference, and thanks to HCAM, you can also view this live stream on HCAM YouTube, HCAM TV, HCAM Facebook, I believe, and is posted on the town's website identifying how the public may join. Additionally, the meeting may also be broadcast by HCAM. For Zoom meetings, please note that this meeting is being recorded and that some attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that others may be able to see you and take care not to screen share your computer. Anything you broadcast may be captured by the recording. All supporting materials have been provided to members of this body and are available on the town's website via the web meeting calendar, unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda items unless I note otherwise. Ground rules. We are now turning to the first item on the agenda. Before we do so, permit me to cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct of our business and to ensure accurate meeting minutes. I will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, the chair will invite board members to provide any comment, questions, or motions. Please hold until your name is called. Please remember to mute your phone or computer when you're not speaking. Please remember to speak clearly and in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. For any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. If members wish to engage in colloquy with other members, please do so through the chair, taking care to identify yourself. For public comment, public comments were submitted prior to this meeting via email and will be read verbatim. And that is that. So I will call the meeting to order. It's 7:04. And I will invite those who are willing and able to stand and recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. For the record, I was already standing. It wasn't that I didn't stand for the pledge. Okay, so that brings us to the first order of business, recognitions. Dr. Kavanaugh, do we have any recognitions tonight?
No, I guess I will just recognize our teachers and families and students for being able to withstand the remote week of learning. So thank you for that.
Okay. Public comment. Nancy, have you seen any public comments for today?
I did not see any. I actually just checked a minute ago.
And I did not see any either. Okay, so that brings us to reports. We're excited tonight. We have a lot of guest speakers. We'll be hearing budgets And I believe, actually, I'm going to defer to Dr. Kavanaugh. I forget now who we're starting with tonight.
So I think, Mr. Cormier, you're first. Is that correct?
Great.
Okay. So I will.
So welcome.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. Oh, now you can see it up there. Great. So our budget, our proposed budget for athletics for FY22, I believe is pretty straightforward, and really is sort of bare bones as we could do it to be fiscally responsible, but at the same time make sure that we're still providing the best experience for our student athletes. So for the personnel summary, I mentioned in here that it is largely to be determined because the largest part of our personnel is obviously our coaching staff. And as many people know, it is we're going into a contract year for the teachers union. So their salaries for next year and beyond will be determined by the contract. So I'm not able to, denote at this time whether or not there'll be a substantial increase or whether it would stay the same for FY22. There is an increase in just over $14,000 now that we have taken over as host of girls ice hockey, our cooperative program. But as I mentioned, probably about a month ago or so, when I came before the school committee, the financial burden, if you will, from girls ice hockey is really not changing because the participating schools pay us for the girls that are part of the team. So although on the line it looks like an increase, this will be factored in the fees that we take in from the schools that are part of our cooperative program. I am requesting to increase our administrative assistant position from 0.5 to 1.0. As I think everybody knows, we are the largest school in the TVL. We have more athletic teams between the middle school and high school than anyone else in our department. And each year, the demands and the paperwork continues to grow. And I think everyone here knows that working in education, there's just more and more things that are required of coaches. There's more and more things required of families when it comes to registration. And a lot of that is administrative work that this position is a huge help to me in doing. Many of the things that we have to do on a regular basis in terms of entering requisitions for purchase orders and taking care of paying our invoices, tracking down over 500 athletic fees per season, sometimes dealing with refunds if need be, depositing checks, and then just a lot of the stuff that goes on behind the scenes that Mrs. Sanborn helps me with, so much between scheduling transportation, helping coordinate event staff, helping double check things just to make sure we have, everything in place that we need to, whether it be officials or, as I said, event staff. She prints out all of our certificates for our student athletes and helps with the end of season banquets, which I know we're not able to do this year, but certainly that is a huge time commitment each season to print out those certificates and get things ready for each of our team's banquets. All of the time that we use on our various facilities, we have to enter that in manually. So it looks nice in our schedule that we're, using the athletic center from this time to this time, but those are all requests that need to be put into a system that we use in our, school dude. Maintenance requests. There's just a lot of those things that take up a lot of time. And having that position go from 0.5 to 1.0 would just be a huge help in terms of efficiency. To be perfectly honest, it would probably help me to not work close to 80 hours a week anymore. And potentially, right now, the things that Mrs. Sanborn does in this role take far more than the 20 hours that she works. So I'm very hesitant to ask her to do anything else when she's already putting in over 20 hours a week. Just within the past hour, I've been texting and emailing with her about a couple things for tomorrow. So she's always going above and beyond her hours. So I'm very hesitant to ask her to do any more. So as a result, I just end up working all night instead. But again, this would be a huge help. The other piece of it is I'm out of the office a lot for meetings. I'm also, even when I'm in the office, in a meeting and unavailable. So having someone in the athletic office who can answer phone calls or answer a student's question when they drop in during the school day. Again, this year is a little different, obviously, but under normal circumstances, these are things that happen on a very regular basis. And a lot of times if you come there prior to 12 o'clock before Mrs. Sanborn gets there. If I'm in a meeting or on a phone call, I'm unavailable, and then the person just kind of gets turned away. So it's nice to have that secondary person there, since there's no substitute teacher for the athletic director. So if I'm not there, then no one's there. And that, we try to avoid that as much as we possibly can. So that's really the background for why we're trying to increase that position. There are some other schools in our league that do have a 1.0 administrative assistant who actually have smaller programs than we do. So I think it's something that would really, truly help sort of the efficiency and the communication of our particular department.
Great, thank you. School committee members, do you have any questions for Mr. Cormier?
Yeah, and I can just, sorry, I was going to say, I can finish right here.
Sorry.
The contracted services and supplies and equipment, I think we've done a really good job trying to make these increases as minimal as possible. The contracted services is almost negligible. It really just has to do with each year the officials, their fee goes up every single year. And then also we just happen to move how we service AEDs from one account to another. So the money that we're spending really isn't changing. It's now in our budget instead of somewhere else. And then for supplies and equipment, it's a little bit misleading, as I mentioned here in the report. We were able to use some savings from FY20 to purchase some of the things that we had planned to purchase this year in FY21. So although it looks like it's a little over 13,000, if you base it off what I actually had in the original budget for last year before the pandemic hit, it's actually only an increase of about $2,000, which is, really, again, each year, the supplies that we use, go up in cost, and just those incremental costs add up as you're purchasing dozens of balls and other pieces of equipment that we use every year.
Is that right?
Yes.
Thank you. Sorry. So school committee members, any questions?
Yes.
Joe?
Yeah, first, thanks, Rich. They're very good. I had a couple of questions. One, were there savings due to the, reduced programming this year, for example, that you were able to use to purchase things that have long-standing value across the school years, so buy supplies this year because you had savings and therefore reduce next year?
Yes, it's good. Great question, Joe. So we're in the process of doing that. It is hard to know what our true savings are because some sports, take football, for example, football hasn't been canceled, it's been moved. So we don't quite know if there'll be certain savings in those sports. And in terms of the equipment, we're really purchasing, in terms of balls and the consumable goods that we use, we still need those, whether we have a 2-month season or a 1-month season. Those types of items are still more or less fixed costs. So where the savings is coming in, Joe, is more in the transportation, officials, some of the contracted services. We are going to save money in those areas, but also not as much as people may think. Whereas in the past, we used to send our JV and varsity teams together on a bus. We now have to send them separately. So although we have, in theory, less games, the number of bus trips we have are actually not all that reduced. So we are in the process of looking at where we're saving money and how we can apply that next year or to purchase things in advance for next year. Something we bought as well this year because we knew we had some savings and we think we're going to really need it this fall too, if you will, is portable goalposts. Certainly we hope to be able to play football on our typical field in David Hughes Stadium, but the realistic situation with the weather will be more likely that we'll need to play on our turf field, which does not have goalposts. So we've purchased goalposts to make sure that we're ready to go in the event that we will need to use the turf field.
Right. All right. And then I had a question on your 0.5 FTE for the administrative assistant. I mean, I understand the tasks may be different, but in the private sector, we've seen kind of elimination of administrative assistant positions due to efficiencies from collaboration tools and things like that. More self-service abilities through IT tools. Do you, and then what also concerns me is you mentioned she's already working more than the 0.5 FTE, and you're already working more than your full-time. And so my concern is that even adding this 0.5 FTE, you're still going to find yourself behind in productivity terms, right? So are there concurrent with this, I guess, you're setting your FTE aside, are there longer term efforts that you can imagine with IT where you're looking for operational savings, either in the way you allocate tasks to staff or eliminating administrative tasks by enhancing our tool set available to you? I don't know if that's ever part of the conversation.
No, it's a good question. It's hard to know exactly how much this will change our workflow by having, Lou and I together in the office. Obviously this year you almost have to throw out, right? It's a very difficult year and the circumstances are different. But last year, Lou comes over midway through the day, and that's at our busiest point in the day, typically the end of the day, as we're having hundreds of athletes go off to practices and contests. So finding times to have conversations to get on the same page on what needs to be done sometimes was part of the problem, just because of the hours and the way they worked. Whereas if we were able to do that earlier in the day during the school day, I think just that in itself would help our productivity and our efficiency. The other thing, which is sort of just an unfortunate reality, Joe, is that a lot of the tasks that we have are manual entry. And they're programs that we're mandated to use, such as the MIAA scheduling system, which, without getting into the nitty gritty, we have to manually enter every single contest that we play. And it's just not a user-friendly system. Now, that's just one example, but that's kind of what we're dealing with. So some of it is, not difficult. It is just very time-consuming work that needs to be kind of manually entered, and finding enough time between, attending the events and attending meetings and responding to emails. It just is one more thing that, moving this position up to the 1.0, I think would be just a huge help in keeping us ahead of the game a little bit more.
And just to add a little bit to that too, Joe, in the last 2 years, we've moved all of the athletic fees onto My School Bucks. So that is all now done electronically, as opposed to kids coming in and passing in 500 checks a season. Parents can pay online. And also that building use that Mr. Cormier mentioned, is through the use of School Dude. And that is also new. So at any time, anybody in the building knows who is using what piece of the facility. So we have moved things, using more technology, but then as he spoke about the MIAA schedule, it doesn't integrate with our student information system. There's roadblocks along the way. So, there has been a lot of movement in the last couple of years though.
Thank you both.
So I'd like to ask a question. It's kind of a follow-on to Joe's, but in the other direction. So he's asking, about your, how much you have to do and how hard it is to do it, et cetera. And my question is, I understand that for budget purposes, you're only asking for 0.5 for an administrative assistant. But if you are looking forward, let's say a couple years, will that be enough to sustain you, or do you see yourself coming back and asking for more help over the next couple of years?
It's a great question, and obviously things will change from year to year, so it's hard to know definitively, as things continue to change and evolve. But the reality is, I think we're making it through one of the most difficult circumstances that you could imagine. Under our current circumstances. And like I said, it's not easy though. We are putting in incredible hours in order to get it done. So I do think this position would help us to work slightly more. I mean, I'll probably never work normal hours, but that's part of the role, and that's fine. But I think just eliminating some of this work that's being done at 10, 11 o'clock at night by having someone that's there full time during the day would be a huge help. In terms of just our overall department and how we're able to respond to the needs of the community. And I really do believe going to a 1.0 for this position should be enough. The two of us, along with our athletic trainer, I think we'll be able to put in place certain protocols. And as some of the things that Joe mentioned in terms of technology and efficiency, we'll be able to put in place, systems that are going to work for us to make this, a more manageable and a more efficient system.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Not for me, but thank you very much for the presentation. Helps to be looking forward to something next year when we're not hopefully dealing with all of these crazy things we are right now.
Absolutely.
Meg, are you good?
No, I think all my questions have been answered. Thank you.
Great. And, me too. The only question I had was, I know you share your administrative assistant with Tim Person.
Mhm.
So I guess I'm curious about what you're thinking. Are you thinking a different person, or keep Lou at full time and then we get someone in? Are you still going to share one person? How is it going to work? Have you thought about that?
We have. Mr. Person would not like this, but I mean, certainly I hope I get Mrs. Sanborn. We'll certainly just cross that bridge when we get there. Lou is amazing. She's such a huge help to both Tim and I. So wherever she would to end up, if this were to happen and go through, would be a loss on one end, certainly. But that's something that we'd have to figure out. But Tim and I have had those conversations, mostly jokingly, sort of who's going to win. And with Lou, but yeah, that certainly is something that would have to be addressed.
You just need coverage. Yep.
Yes.
And I did, look around at some, I actually saw districts with assistant ADs and, most of the districts seem to have an administrative assistant, but there are a few that are quite extravagant. So
yeah, there are some that have assistant ADs and administrative assistants.
Yes, I saw that. Yeah. So so thank you for this presentation. It's good to see that athletics are continuing. It's good to think ahead, and thank you for all. I cannot even imagine the meetings. This year's administrative burden must be unbelievably heavy. So I know there's so many meetings just to try to figure out how to make athletics go forward 4 times, not just 3 now. So
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
No, absolutely. I'm just glad our students have the chance to play and be together as a team.
All right. Thank you. I think we are going to move on to curriculum.
Yes, I think we're going to Mrs. Parsons' budget.
Mrs. Parsons.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for accommodating my presentation at this time of the evening. I wanted to start by just acknowledging 2 of the positions that this school committee and the Hopkinton community did approve over the past couple of years that have been inordinately helpful in terms of curriculum and instruction for our students. One is the K-6 Ela Director. That position is held by Deb Moriarty, and she has just been a wonderful addition to our administrative team and an amazing source of support for our elementary administrators and our educators in terms of really growing a robust ELA curriculum at the K-6 level. The other position that is new this year to us is the Director of English Language Acquisition, Equity, and Access, and that's Jen Suker, whom you've met earlier this year at one of our meetings. And again, having that person in that slot really advocating for our students who are multilingual learners and students who are learning English as a second language. We really needed that voice, and I truly and firmly believe we selected just the right person for that position. And I'm really happy with what we've seen so far and the work that I know she'll be helping to promote moving forward. So with that, in this year's budget, I have 1.6 positions that I will be requesting, and they're similar in nature to those that I just mentioned. So the first position is a 0.6 math coach. And, it's always interesting in education when we talk about parts of people and parts of positions. So this would be a part that would take a 0.4 position that we currently have in our part-time math coach and really turn that into a full-time position. The position, in my estimation, over the past, so Shelley's in her 2nd year now, and Shelley Moran, for those of you who may not know her, is a Hopkins teacher. She teaches 5th grade, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and she serves as our math coach on Thursdays and Fridays. And she's also served as a curriculum team leader at Hopkins as well. So she's really had her hand in curriculum for a very long time. And certainly her passion is math. She's been doing the job for, part of last year was her first year when we ended abruptly, and now she's in her second year. And the impact that I've seen her able to make just in this short period of time has been impressive. She understands curriculum. She understands the thought process behind developing mathematical learners and mathematical thinking. She's a member of a number of state boards that have to do with math leadership. And probably first and foremost, she's a teacher at heart and really understands what happens in classrooms and understands solid teaching and learning. The position in its current 2-day week form is very, very helpful, but it's certainly, I would say, subpar in terms of the potential that I see this position having and the impact that I believe it can make on students and learning. And when we think about our teachers and the types of things they're doing when they're with students, from 9 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon, or, slightly different at Hopkins, they're focusing on the instruction. And having someone at the helm in that particular curricular area, especially a subject that is as critically important as mathematics, having someone to really lead that work and delve into data and meet with teachers during their PLC time and their common planning time, being able to work with teachers as they're really developing lessons and interventions is, in my estimation, it's a position that we really can't live without right now. And part of that just simply has to do with the nature of how strongly I believe in teacher leadership and supporting teachers in their work. But the other part of that is the position that we find ourselves in, having students who have been out of school in person from last March through June, and in the hybrid model that we have this fall. We know that we will see gaps. It's not a surprise. As hard as our teachers are working, and they're working very, very hard, we will have some repair work and some intervention work that will be needed. And that's really the impetus behind, again, requesting. I know I requested this position last year and it was not able to be funded. But that's the reason for coming back to the table and really promoting the possibility of making that a full-time position. We've been able to be a little bit creative and free her up at certain times. Vanessa Bolello, her principal, has been flexible and allowed her to, come in and join meetings at, times when technically she should be at a Hopkins meeting or something like that. But it would certainly be nice to know that we would have a mathematics expert at the K-5 level. Similarly, at the high school, we have Carla Crisafulli, who's really a math leader in the role of SML, and Kathy Anasaskis at the middle school level. So I feel like this would kind of bring our elementary school into a position where we would have that real depth of knowledge with mathematics. The second position is really more of simply meeting the needs of our growing enrollment in our population of English language learners. We currently have 9 educators in our district, and with 273 students that we have on our roster right now, 9 educators, we're looking at caseloads that are growing to the point where we're not going to be able to sustain reasonable caseloads and reasonable attention from our ESOL teachers to our students. We're looking at well over 100 students between Marathon, and when we look at who's moving up to Elmwood and et cetera, we have growing numbers. They're starting at the younger levels. These students are working their way through. And we want to be able to staff that department in such a way that the instruction will be meaningful and that our students will get what they need and our teachers will really be able to attend to the students in the manner that they should. The piece about L instruction is our educators, really much like special education, have other responsibilities on top of just instructing students. They're monitoring, they're assessing, they're going through learning standards, they're consulting with educators, they're connecting with families. So there are a lot of pieces to that puzzle on top of just simply managing a student caseload. I believe would give us reasonable caseloads and a good working group for that department. In terms of expenses, you will see, I was a little surprised myself to see the percentage increase when I looked at that. I don't like to see a 100% increase, especially in difficult budget times. And I think I explained that a little bit in the report, but part of that was due to the fact that last year just happened to be kind of an outlier year in terms of textbook needs. And for the most part, when we talk about textbook needs, we really are referring to the high school and somewhat at the middle school as well. And many of those textbooks are now subscription based, and we purchase a subscription for a length of time. Often it's for 6 years, and then you're kind of at the mercy of just literally the calendar. You know, when does the subscription expire? This year it's geometry books, last year it was algebra 2 books, et cetera. So in terms of what we are asking for, there are a number of academic areas that we are looking for funding for texts, and that includes world history, environmental science, world language, and advanced place economics. The environmental science also is an AP class, and part of the rationale for that expense is also due to some changes that were determined by the College Board. And some of the text updates and things help our teachers ensure that the standards and the curricula that they're instructing our students in is what the College Board is expecting of our educators. There is a request at the middle school. They too had a science subscription that is expiring this coming June. And our science curriculum team leaders spent quite a bit of time perusing different resources and settled on one that they and I and Mr. Keller think is going to be a nice match for the middle school science department. It's Discovery Education. It's got a robust online tool. It's got an online textbook, and it's got, without being overly theatrical about it, it has a lot of the bells and whistles that are really important in terms of instruction, ability to be translated into different languages, supporting teachers in terms of developing hands-on activities, helping teachers to design just right assessments for students, content that's frequently being updated. And it also comes with an entire library of educational resources that appeal to all content areas that we'll be able to use throughout the entire middle school. So although this is a purchase that's being made for technically the science department at the middle school, it will serve all of our content areas and students and teachers. So, you know, I am working with Mrs. Rothermick. She's been a great help in terms of organization of textbooks, and I am working with our SMLs at the high school to really create almost like a multi-year capital plan of what our long-range textbook needs will be. So doesn't come as a surprise every year. There always are surprises because things are constantly evolving and changing in education, but we're working to create a foundation that will help us kind of have a more reliable bottom line in terms of our text needs. So really, this is a relatively small budget presentation. Those are our main topics. So I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
Okay, let's start with school committee members. Any questions for Mrs. Parson?
Yeah, sorry.
No, go ahead,
Go
Leah.
ahead, Meg.
Go ahead, Leah. It's your
So my
birthday.
question is actually more procedural. These letters, are they only sort of brought to us and we discuss them, or do they become part of the entire budget request when we give it to the select board and the town? The reason
You're talking about the executive summaries, right?
Yeah.
I guess Carol or Susan, what happens to those?
No, I think these live with us.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, because I was looking at the 100%. I'm like, I totally get why it's jumped so much. It's, you know, I remember that we pushed money from the previous year's budget to the current year's budget in order to be able to buy text and everything. So I don't think that the 100% scares me, but I was more worried about if this goes to someone else, maybe we should frame it slightly differently. But that was it.
It's a good point. Thank you.
Meg?
I just wanted to thank you so much, Jen, for so clearly delineating your needs. I think it's helpful to parents and to us to hear in such great detail about Mrs. Moran's strengths and what she'll be able to contribute for the students, for the K-5 students. I also love that you're being so proactive in considering the ways in which our students might have fallen behind. And by fiscal year 22, they're going to need that added support in the wake of such a lopsided teaching and learning years we're having now. But I really just wanted to commend you for the unusually detailed and elegant report. It was just a pleasure to hear.
Well, thank you from an English professor. That's a very nice compliment. Thank you, Meg. I appreciate that.
Any other questions or comments from School Committee? Joe?
Yeah, thank you. I guess my question is about textbooks. I see like the curriculum expense is texts and text subscriptions. And I wonder what's your opinion or view, or what's the data show, either of those, on are we moving more towards like online access to textbook material these days? Sometimes my high school kids tell me, oh, we don't use books at school, which just sounds so alarming to me. But they say, oh, we get packets or we get things online, yet their backpacks are still have a lot of books. I don't know if I favor one or the other. I guess I have a favor towards books in some way, but not necessarily textbooks. But what is the trend? What are you seeing? What do we see in the district with expenses for text and text subscriptions? Is it more going online or more towards books?
Sure. And I think actually having spoken to some of your other colleagues on this very board, you're not alone in your question. And I'd say at the end of the day, what we really need to see, Joe, is a balance. Our students absolutely need to have text in hand. And, you know, for example, at the younger levels, I hear Lauren DeVoe say that all the time, Vanessa Bolello, text in hand. And our students need to understand how, and that's at the lower levels, but when we start talking about the higher levels, they need to understand how to get through a rigorous piece of text and really make meaning from it. And that can come in a number of different ways. So, you know, while maybe some people from, I'll just say my generation, not to date anybody else, feel much more comfortable with the written word on a piece of paper in a hardbound edition of a book, our kids are living in a world where they are more readily accessible in terms of things that come to them through a screen. I think that, you know, I've had some recent conversations with Carol about brain-based research and in what ways do students learn more productively. And there's certainly a case to be made that there are times, especially when students are responding to text, that they're doing so in writing using paper and pencil versus doing everything using the keyboard. A lot of times what our teachers are also doing is making sure that they're pairing different types of texts together for students. And sometimes that does come in the form of something that might be a handout versus a traditional textbook. In terms of what the trend is, I don't know that I'm seeing really any textbook companies that are offering just a hardcover text at this point in time. Nearly all of them are, you know, when you look at the cost is typically for the online, and then you're not paying that much more when you're adding in the hardcover text. So in most of our high school classes, we do have both. And our teachers have different kind of rhyme or reason for when they feel one is more appropriate than the other. But I'd say, you know, a balance is certainly, we want our kids to have access to both print copies and online as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Nancy?
So thank you for all the detail in this. My question is, in looking at the math coaching position, because I know that provides some remediation for our students, I'm assuming that we are expecting an increase in need for remediation next year following kind of pandemic related shifts. Is that accounted for in looking? I know some of it's does not appear to be specific to the pandemic, but is there any concern about the capacity of what we have right now to be able to address remediation next year beyond what's presented?
Well, one of the things that we have also at our discretion is some grant funding. So when we talk about grant funding through some of the federal grants like Title I. That's really designed to help students who really are in need of support and intervention. And this spring, for example, we are rolling out some Title I tutoring in some of our buildings to address this exact kind of issue. And what the hope is that our teachers are going to continue to grow in their ability to really dig in and meet the needs of their learners in their classrooms and really design more tailor-made instruction, more small group instruction when possible by using the data that they have available to them. And really, our teachers just always don't have that dedicated time the way that a math specialist would or math coach to go in and really start picking out, well, we have this group of students and we have this skill that's a deficit area. So my hope would be that we start by what we call that tier 1, which is your general education. And that's where this coach would really come into play to make sure that we're doing everything in our power to support the general instruction. And that's really the goal of this position, to support what's happening in the general education classrooms. I think it's possible, not knowing what our scores are going to look like and what the outcomes are going to be after all of this, that I'm not sure that any budget would ever be able to fund enough interventionists to, address all of the needs that we might begin to see. So I think the more that we can use a position like this to build the skill set and the capacity of our general education teachers, I feel like that's step 1. And I think next year we'll have a lot more information to look at to begin to ask ourselves, was this enough? Have we identified a need for more, or was this sufficient?
Great, thank you. I don't know that I was aware of the Title I funding that was going to happen for this spring. So that's, I think, really encouraging as well.
Yeah, thank you.
And, I will say that I asked a whole bunch of questions in advance of this meeting, and Mrs. Parson was really generous with her time in explaining to me a lot of how we select course materials. For the community, we have a policy, I believe it's IJ, which states some qualities that school committee has asked for our instructional materials. And I was just curious in the process how we sort of vet materials, and I just want to thank Mrs. Parson so much. I'm not going to go into details. I mean, if you have any questions, she has lots of answers. But I felt very comforted to know how many and how many different perspectives come to play when it comes to picking course materials. It's not just even the content owner, say, I guess, for that subject matter expert, but we also have. I asked about equity and inclusion and subject matter, making sure that it's appropriate for different cultures. And we now have an equity and inclusion person in our staff who is part of the process. And we've done a lot of training with our administrators and our teachers. Dr. Kavanaugh has done to help make us more aware of bias and so forth. We also have dedicated teams that are looking at that. So there's a whole process, there's the whole engine behind the selection of these materials that really made me feel very good. And I really thank you for taking the time to kind of review that. I also asked a bunch of questions about the Discovery Ed tool. I like that it is sort of a supplemental tool for the science curriculum. It seems like a great tool. I think we'll be piloting it for a year, and we can really understand if it works for us or not. I'm among my colleagues who, I guess, wonder about the balance of digital resources and the ease with which sometimes you can consume information versus the merits of wrestling with text. Sometimes text isn't very glamorous. It can look really daunting. And I think it sounds like we're working really hard through our curriculum to build both skills, both make sure that our students are able to not turn off when they're presented with text and know how to chunk it out and find information at their grade level, but also have those additional skills, additional tools like this one that provides different ways to access the curriculum and I think this can also differentiate, and I think it can be translated, has all sorts of other features. So in short, I really felt very good about the whole process, and I really want to thank you for your dedication, the work, and all of the teams that are behind you that work on this.
Well, thank you, Amanda. And one thing I will add is, because you kind of just referred to it, is how impressed I was with the middle school science CTLs. And when I went in and talked a little bit about, what are you thinking? Are we looking at a new text series? And they are so proud of the work that they have done as curricular developers and teacher leaders, that they immediately said, we want something to supplement. We want something to add to the resources that we already have, that we've spent a lot of time building. And we think there's something out there that will do that for us, that will not take away from the work that we have done. You will often hear a teacher say, can I just have a book? Can I just have a series or something that's packaged? And I find this really to be the perspective of so many of our Hopkinton teachers, just a great amount of pride and really intelligent work in terms of developing curriculum that then we find resources to support.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm thrilled about seeing the math coach. I think coming off the pandemic, I echo everybody else. I think we're going to need more support for our teachers to figure out how to differentiate, remediate, handle the population that's coming back to school and their needs. So I think that it has come to my attention that we may have colleagues in the audience from Select Board and Appropriations. So I would just invite you, if you have a question, please jump in.
Hey, Amanda, it's Brian Herr. I have been listening to the various presentations so far. Don't worry about line item percentages, in my mind anyway. It kind of comes down to the bottom line as you roll it all up. But I think so far so good. And I appreciate listening in. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Brian.
Yes, and thank you for having me and for the Appropriations Committee. And I have the same comment as Brian, that there's a lot of detail here. And again, I'm just taking all the different presentations in, and we'll look at the bottom line as we get to it.
Yep.
I guess I know it's hard to do it. I guess you don't have the contract numbers in there, so it'll be hard. I don't know when that's coming in, when that gets integrated in, but I guess that's down the road a bit.
Great. Well, thank you both for being here and for tracking this process. I know we are meeting December 10th with the Select Board in the joint meeting, and we'll be more in a position to look at the rolled up numbers at the time. But if you have questions at the end of each presentation, you are welcome to chime in. Okay, I think we're good with curriculum. Thank you very much, Mrs. Parson.
Thank you.
Mr. Keller, I believe.
Thank you. Yes. Appreciate you having me here tonight to talk about the Hopkinton Middle School budget. I'll begin with personnel. I'm requesting one position for the upcoming year, and that is a social studies teacher. Over the past 2 years, we've had 66 students at Hopkinton Middle School. Last school year, we had 2 8th grade English teachers delivering social studies instruction to 2 classes of students. This year, we moved a 7th grade social studies teacher up to 8th grade due to class sizes. And in grade 7, we have 4 teachers teaching outside their disciplines to deliver social studies to students. So adding a social studies teacher to HMS would accomplish 2 goals for next year. Would bring down class sizes, and it would ensure that students are receiving instruction from a licensed educator in social studies. Class sizes for next year are projected grade 6 at 306 students, which leads to a 20 student average per class. Grade 7 is projected at 312 students, averaging 21 per class. And grade 8, 307 students, averaging 21 per class. In terms of expenses, I want to acknowledge and thank curriculum leaders. They did a lot of work to look at needs versus wants. And I want to thank all the teachers who met with their curriculum leaders in each department to kind of sort through those things. As you see on the executive summary, 21 of our 31 expense accounts are at or below where they were where they are in FY21. And so I'm just going to note a couple that aren't at or below. And just to give some support to why I feel that those are necessary. The biggest one is English textbook. So we're looking to purchase novels and text that align with anchor texts in grade 8 and grade 6, and to increase the amount of literature that we're offering to our students. We've done a lot of work the past 2 years in grade 6 and grade 6 working with Deb Moriarty and our grade 6 teachers. And then in grade 7, and we continue to do work in grade 8 to bring in new literature and greater options for students. We have a new administrator who I know you had an opportunity to meet this year, Chris Ocampo, and so I'm looking at professional development for him next year. There's a program that I attended and that Ann Ben-Bennick attended that's a new and aspiring school leaders that has been a really positive 3-day conference that has been offered, and so I'm recommending that he attend that next year. In physical education, there's a substantial increase there, and we're looking to purchase materials that meet our student needs better than they have in the past. Our media arts account is up by over $1,400. It's time to replace headphones and cameras that students utilize in that class. And we have an increase in our professional development account, looking to work with a consultant on establishing some school-wide behavioral protocols that have been in place at the elementary school. I know the elementary school has been working a lot on those, and we want to continue that effort at the middle school. And so there's some consistency from school to school. And that concludes my presentation. Feel free to ask any questions.
Okay, school committee. Who wants to go first? No questions from Mr. Keller.
I do have one question, Mr. Keller, which is not entirely important, but I'm so curious about the $95 for student behavioral incentives.
Yes. Yeah, so actually this year, our teacher has a lot of experience in PBIS, so positive behavior intervention strategies. And so she has been establishing with a certain population of our students kind of these level 1, level 2, level 3 system. And so we've actually been purchasing things from the school store at the high school. And so that is really what we're looking to bring in, to have kind of a school store. So we've had conversations with our intensive special needs program and with students in our Empower and Start program, where we want to initiate a school store where we kind of have, we had a parent, Beth DeLeva, work with us a couple of years ago to build a really nice kiosk for us that we were going to fill with different items that students could purchase. And so that's kind of to get that off the ground. The pandemic hit and a couple other things happened, and so we've been stalled on that, but we're looking to get that back up and running and have our students in our intensive special needs program work to gain some skills with merchandising and working with students in that regard.
That sounds really great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Joe?
Yeah, thanks, Alan. What's the net impact of these? You mentioned 24 out of the 31 accounts are at or below, and these are the ones that are above, but what's the net impact to the bottom line?
Susan, do you have that handy? I apologize.
I'm going to have to apologize. I'm getting a public service announcement over my phone and I can't hear you guys. Apparently there's COVID-19 coming on. So if you can ask the question again in a minute.
Maybe I just have to turn my head sideways here. All right.
Yeah, I see 9.4 and I'm just not sure if that's the right number. There's not,
I'm sorry.
What's the total expense impact? What is the total change?
The net impact over last year. And I guess also same question as I asked Mr. Cormier is, are there things you can purchase this year due to any of the changes, or is this year in spending due to the way we're doing things, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think, are there things that we could purchase for next year using this year's funds? Is that the question?
Yeah, some of the material things, right?
Yeah. I would say I would have to look a little bit closer, but I think the stuff that we've been purchasing this year, a lot of the stuff that we've been purchasing, we've actually been purchasing a lot of things to ensure that students who are remote have access to materials. So what we find is that we're purchasing a lot more things than we have in years past. And so I would guess that in most cases, we're not going to be able to do that. So we had to purchase additional novels that ordinarily that we would have shared in the classroom to have more on hand. So I can't say for certain that we would be able to do that, but my guess is I think we're probably going to use the majority of our accounts this year because of the increased volume of things that we need. You know, for instance, I think we have about 140 students who are remote. And so students who are in our robotics program, for instance, on Monday, we're putting out robotics equipment for those students who are remote for their parents to pick up so they can be working on those projects at home to ensure that they're getting the same experience that students are in class are having. And we just don't have the inventory for that stuff. So, you know, Doug Scott and I were having a conversation the other day, you know, to look at actually going kind of above our what we had budgeted for this year. So long-winded answer to, I'm not sure. That might be a account by account thing, but I don't think we're gonna have a lot of money left over, to be honest.
Yeah, I think I would have to agree with that. It's not like programs are not running at the middle school. They're running differently. So maybe what they had originally budgeted is not exactly what we're purchasing, but we're not having savings, if you will. You know, it's just transitioned to be sure that students have what they need both remotely and in the classroom, but there's probably not really a savings. It's just different.
Thank you, Susan. Yeah, and related to that, I guess, can you help clarify for the community where the CARES Act comes in? Like if Alan has to purchase additional textbooks because kids are remote due to COVID, is that something that's covered and therefore we get funding from a source that we hadn't predicted a year ago when we put the budget together?
Yeah, so we did have opportunities where we were buying as a for instance, additional gym equipment, or in the elementary schools, additional recess equipment because, you know, of not having that ability to share. And those are opportunities where we did use the CARES funding. So, you know, those additional pieces of materials, if you will, which we would not have budgeted for anyway. Those were shifted over to CARES.
Thanks.
So I have a question. I'm looking at the omnibus, and I was trying to figure out, is the last page where it says 0.4% change, the percent change in the expenses, or what we're asking for next year? Is that what I'm understanding, or am I misreading that?
No, that's correct. So the grand total increase for that department for the middle school is 0.4. That includes both personnel and, but that does not include any positions. So new positions that have been requested have not been entered into here yet. Until the school committee actually approves of those new positions, then we would enter those. So they're discussed separately.
Okay, and right now the request is 1.0 full-time social studies teacher.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, okay, that seems more than entirely reasonable to me for a year-over-year change. Thank you.
Thank you.
Meg or Nancy?
I echo Leah. I think that one position is really reasonable in this, and also appreciate all the information. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And I'll just say, you know, I really appreciate when teachers are teaching in their disciplines that they're licensed to teach, and the passion that comes through when you're teaching in your comfort zone is contagious. And the idea of, I think, supporting the 7th grade social studies curriculum with, you know, all teachers who are passionate about social studies and civics is great. That, you know, that to me is really important. So I appreciate the ask.
Yeah, thank you, Amanda. I do feel I want to say, the grade 8 teachers who did it last year and the grade 7 teachers who are doing it this year have been great and been working really closely with the social studies teachers. So I think it's been an interesting experience because in some cases, in many cases, they're able to kind of bring the two subjects together in their class. So it's been interesting from that perspective, but ultimately, I agree with you. I think that it's best to have somebody who's licensed delivering that curriculum, and then ultimately from that area, working with the English teacher, working with the math and social studies teacher, and with the foreign language teacher. But I do want to acknowledge the hard work that they're doing and appreciate what they're doing. But I certainly do appreciate and desire to have that social studies teacher.
Great. So I think we're all set with Mr. Kelly. I think, Meg, unless you had any.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
I have a question from appropriations.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Mr. Manning.
Yes, thank you. So in the increase in class size or the students, is it 66 for the whole school, or is that just for social studies, or what is?
No, that is for the whole. Sorry, that's for the school for the past 2 years. An increase of 66 students over the past 2 years.
Okay, what is it? Just in this past 1 year, what is the change in for the whole school?
From current year to next year?
Yes.
I believe, so this current year, October 1st enrollment is 923, and next year we're projected at 925.
Okay, good to know. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's it for me.
And I know I've probably said this many times, but I feel compelled to jump in. I am very concerned about enrollment for next year because we really have no way at this point in time of having sort of a good prediction of where we might be. I mean, I know people in the community would argue it seems like you never have a good idea of where you're going to be, but this year of all years, we are really, sort of without anything to kind of hang our hats on. So.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Kelly.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Mr. Bishop, welcome.
Hey, well, thanks for having me. I'm excited to present the FY22 budget at the high school. I know Dr. Kavanaugh mentioned it earlier, but I just want to take a quick second to just thank the students and staff for making the most of the remote week. I know it's challenging. It's not easy. I was able to pop into a few classes the last few days and seen some really great things. So just kudos to our amazing staff and to our excellent students for doing the best that they can during this week. So this budget we put together this year, we worked hard to have it be very fiscally responsible. A number of people are part of the development of the high school budget. I meet many times with the subject matter leaders, coming up with their different equipment, supply, co-curricular, and textbook accounts. Our two assistant principals are very much involved in the process as well, and of course, central office. So I do want to thank everybody who was integral in creating this budget, this proposed budget. This is my 8th year presenting a high school budget, and I'd have to say this is my the most straightforward and probably bare bones budget that I have presented. I think given the circumstances and the unknowns and the uncertainties, it's not the year to be asking for the nice things to have. I think we need to focus on what we need to have to continue to be successful, and I think that's what we've done in this budget. In terms of personnel, as you see on the executive summary, we are proposed to ask for 1.0 FTE increase for next year. And this is really to try to keep class sizes at an appropriate level and meet the needs of our students. There's going to be a pretty large senior class graduating this year, but there's another large 8th grade class coming in. And where we do not feel necessarily the space crunch this year because we're in the hybrid model, if we do shift back to a full-time in-person, everyone in the building, we will have some really large class sizes. So that 1.0 FTE isn't one particular subject. Like in years past, we would probably distribute that FTE across different disciplines, depending on what the needs are. And we usually conduct our course selection process in March, so we'll have a better idea of where we will see those increases. But we have certain departments in mind that we probably would assume that we're going to see some pretty high numbers and need some additional staffing. I do think it's important, as you see also on the executive summary, when we proposed our first budget at the high school, the personnel was much higher, the requests, upwards of 215,000. And that includes the staffing that we currently have and need for our hybrid remote model. If you remember, I came in front of the school committee at the beginning of the year asking for 2.2 FTE as well as 3 paraprofessionals, and they have done a tremendous job. But if we are, as the district believes in terms of next year, going back to hopefully a full-time in person, we probably will not need those positions. But if we are in the same instructional model, or if we do see a spike in enrollment, we will need to come back to the table and address that, because those positions have been really critical in order for us to be able to operate and run a successful hybrid model. So that's the personnel request. In terms of the expense summary, we have 34 non-payroll accounts at the high school, and 30 for FY22 are either level funded or showing a decrease as compared to FY21. Of the 4 remaining accounts, only 3 show an increase of $1,000 or more. So if you go budget to budget, there is less than $1,000 increase for FY22 compared to FY21 in the expense accounts. So it's a 0.30 increase. The 3 accounts that show the increase of over 1,000, the first is our ELA textbooks. And I know Ms. Parson talked a lot about textbooks, so I won't necessarily get into that, but this is our largest increase when it comes to our accounts. It's up $17,000, and we're looking to fund new textbooks, or new texts, I should say, across 9 through 12 that identify areas around increasing equity and inclusivity. I know, Amanda, you mentioned that earlier. And I think it's really important that we bring on some new texts that will support our students' growth as they form attitudes towards other persons and races and cultures. And the high school has a goal of improving social emotional health of our students, and it's one of our goals every year. And I think the more inclusive reading opportunities that we can provide will allow students to see themselves in the literature. And I think that's a really important thing, and it will build opportunities for empathy. And also these new texts support the district's plan and in the school improvement plan at the high school to honor and advance diversity awareness as it applies to our curriculum and instruction. And I'd be remiss if I didn't thank our subject matter leader, Sarah Elam, for the English department, who's tremendous, who has done a lot of work into looking at some of these new texts that we're considering. She's put together a team of English teachers at the high school to kind of examine what text, from Flight to The Vanishing Half, Inside Out and Back Again. There's a lot of different topics that we're considering, thinking about what level they might go into, but we're really excited to bring on these new texts as they relate very well to our school improvement plan and district strategic plan. Another account that is up over $1,000, $1,300, is our history textbook account. I think Ms. Parson talked about the online subscriptions for our world history, but this increase is really more for our AP US history class. When I started as principal, we typically had about 1 AP history class, US, and now it's up to 5, potentially 6 sections. It's a really popular class. Mr. Sawyer and Mr. Spiegel do a tremendous job teaching the class. So we need more books for those students. So oftentimes there are books within the classroom for students to access. And with our increase of numbers, that's really what we're looking for. They also have the online subscription, which is important, but we're really looking for more textbooks within the classroom. So Joe, to your point, kids aren't carrying those heavy books home all the time. And then the last account that's up, and this account continues to go up every year. And I think it's no surprise, the subject matter leader in this department it just has really added so much energy into our business, technology, and engineering classes. Mr. Scott, I know that Mr. Keller mentioned him earlier as well. That account is up $1,000, and that's just based on enrollment to keep our robotics, engineering, computer science, and our HHS TV classes with giving them the materials and the supplies that they need for the increased enrollment. So again, this is a pretty straightforward budget at the high school. I do believe that we have budgeted what we need to continue to be successful and give the teachers what they need and the students a great experience. Not as much as we've put forward in the past, but I am confident that we have done a really nice job. And again, kudos to the folks that helped me put this together for all of their work. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you have about the high school budget.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop. Who would like to start?
I have a couple of questions.
Meg? Sorry.
Hi, Mr. Bishop. Thanks so much for this great report. Are all of the ELA textbooks hardback textbooks, or does this include the digital copies too?
You talking about what we currently have or what we're looking into?
What you're looking for?
Yeah, we're looking for more hardbacks. I know that there is a push to go more online with our texts, but students really like having a book in their hand to read, especially when we talk about the novels for English. And so Miss Elliman, the English department did survey their students, and 90% of the students came back saying they'd prefer to have a book in their hand. So we're really looking for more kind of novels, text for students to have in their hands when it comes to these new editions.
Because I love to hold books in my hand rather than look on a screen too, but I know that the digital books are often 60% less than the hard copies now. I'm just offering that.
Sure. Yeah, it's certainly something we can look into. I'm not sure if the titles that we're looking into have that option. They probably do, but it's certainly something we can look into.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Can I ask a
Leah?
question?
Sure.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for this. Thank you for such a tight increase in the budget. The 3.4% is, or 3.6%, sorry, is extremely reasonable yet again. I'm sure you've already taken this into account, but I just wanted to ask the question and just get the answer, which is, I know that we think that a lot of students went to homeschooling and private schools for this year because of the COVID issues, and that they will come back to our schools probably next year. Has that sort of increase over the amount of new students coming into the school been taken into account with the request for this budget?
Yeah, that's a great question. It has. So
Okay.
when you look at the numbers from this year to next year, there's a slight increase, but we are expecting, like you said, Leah, that there's going to be students coming back from private school or from homeschool, or at least that's what we anticipate and what we've heard. So we need to prepare for that. And I think that, I know Dr. Kavanaugh mentioned it as well, just kind of, we've seen a spike in enrollment year after year. And so we need to be ready for that if we are going back to kind of a full in-person instruction next year. So it certainly was part of our discussions when we put forward with the 1.0 FTE.
Okay, thank you so much.
Joe?
Yes, thanks. Thanks, Mr. Bishop. I was looking at your first paragraph, and I appreciate the full story there on how you got to your FTE request. Because one thing that's been nagging at me since August and September, when I think we approved some headcount due to you having remote teachers, and then we needed to have monitors in the classroom in some cases where there were students without a teacher or something like that. Yep. But I worried that those would become permanent. And I think what you're saying here is you've assumed those out of the budget for next year, but you're also kind of warning us that if we end up in a situation again next year where there is the need to have multiple learning modalities, we might have to bring those back again. But if we can just keep them cordoned off as temporary, that's what I was relieved to see. And the rest of it looks like, textbooks, which you got to do it. I know that, we talk about like online and textbook, and I was talking to one of the other presenters about this too, but the textbook companies have always had kind of a way of getting you coming and going no matter how you try to get away. So you try to move online and they're like, oh, we own that too. That's for free if you buy these other books or whatever.
They're smart. They're smart. Yeah.
We'll try though, right?
Yeah.
Thanks, Joe. Nancy, do you have any?
I don't have any questions. I think everything I had is either answered in the presentation or by the questions that everybody had before me, but also just really appreciate how you've, as you said, really looked at this as not the year for the things that are kind of the nice to have more so than what's absolutely necessary. This budget looks reasonable without significant increases. So thank you very much for that, Mr. Bishop.
Thanks, Nancy.
And I'll echo the same. It's a very lean budget ask. I will say that I love the way you always include student voice and choice, and the fact that you you guys surveyed the students about the text and the format. That's just sort of how you do everything, and it really makes the school what it is. I think that whole approach is very, very valued. I love the AP History program. Can totally see why it's popular, and thrilled that robotics is continuing to thrive. So I completely understand the demand for those materials, and thank you for keeping it as lean as possible.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Mr. Manning, did you have any questions?
No, good presentation. I have no questions. Thank you.
Okay. I think Mr. Herr is mostly auditing, so thank you very much.
I'm all set, thanks.
I think that does it for the budget presentation. I think we're moving into, we're going to jump agenda items a little bit from what is presented because Mr. Bishop has a couple of other items that we would like to bring together and then move on with the agenda, if that's okay with everybody. Okay,
Sure.
So at this point, I think we're done with budgets per se, and we'll move on to item of new business. Item A, the United Advisory Stipend.
We can start with it. And thank you so much for taking this out of order. I really appreciate it. And I'll try to be brief. I know that you have a document in front of you kind of detailing the reason why we're looking to not necessarily add more money to our Unite program. Right now, we have typically 2 advisors that each get paid $1,500 to run the Unite program. And it's one of our biggest programs. It has the most amount of students in it when you look at kind of our clubs. It's an opportunity for our juniors and seniors to have a leadership opportunity and to mentor the freshmen as they're coming into the high school. We've seen a real increase in the amount of students that are part of Unite, which I think is great, once we went away from our advisory period. And so now we try to take a Unite mentor and pair them up with 2 to 3 freshmen as opposed to 12 in the past. So we do have an increase of almost 100 students plus over the last few years in our Unite program, which I think is wonderful. And we've had 2 really dedicated advisors that have done a tremendous job. Unfortunately, one of them this year has just so many other responsibilities that they've stepped down. So we have Connor Zanini, one of our chemistry teachers at the high school, is doing it right now by himself. And he's done a tremendous amount of work leading up to the year. And then at the start of the year, as you can imagine, there was a lot of moving parts when it came to transitioning students, a lot of videos put together, and it's a lot of work. And so what I'm proposing is to take the 2 stipends at $1,500 and to make 1 stipend of $3,000, partly because of, like I said, we have 1 person that is interested and that is advising the group, doing all the work for the Unite program and doing it at a really high level. And I'd like to reward him for that. And I think with the support of the administration and the 2 assistant principals, we are able to move that program forward without needing a second advisor. I think that the team that we have supporting Mr. Zanini, we can continue to move forward with 1 advisor. And so that's what I'm hoping to do here. I've talked to Mr. Zanini quite a bit about the responsibilities that he has so far this year, and they're different. I know we've talked a little bit about how things are just different. So yeah, there's not as many nights in person, but there are more things online, and he's meeting with the Unite mentors, all of them consistently. So I'd like to propose that we take the 2 stipends and then just put them into 1, no budget increase. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you have about the program or about this particular stipend.
I do have a question just in terms of, and I think it's great that the high school offers so many opportunities for students to develop leadership. So I think that's great from that standpoint. My one question would be kind of beyond this unique year where Mr. Zanini is doing all of this stuff online, would be when we eventually go back in person and those students are all doing in-person meetings, would it seem at that point that we would need 2 advisors again for purposes of supervision of that many students at one time?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And I think, given the year, and I completely understand it, there's people are busy, people have a lot on their plates. They're not necessarily taking on more. And so, for Connor to do that this year, I give him a lot of credit. And I think this is where the administration can support him. So next year, if we are back full time, I think with the two assistant principals, myself. I love I used to do the Unite program when I was a school counselor. So I love getting involved in that and talking about leadership and mentoring students. So I think with the team that we have, we'll be able to support Mr. Zanini if he is still the only one that is going to be the advisor of the group.
Anyone else questions?
Yeah, no, just Amanda, that I think you've brought up in the past, the need to look at these stipend positions holistically across, because once you make changes to one, then it might affect expectations on others. So I don't have that full context, but I get it. Amanda's muted.
Sorry about that. I said, any other questions or comments? I have a question. It's sort of along the lines of what Nancy was saying. I mean, I'm so thankful that in this craziness that we're experiencing this year, Mr. Zanini has been willing to tackle 220 mentors and who knows how many mentees and do it remotely. And, when everyone is Zoom fatigued, including our teachers, sure, to take this on. So in this year, I think that he's probably more than earned this $3,000. My concern, kind of, Nancy's questioning, is going forward. It's a caseload that we wouldn't normally see in other activities. A caseload of 220 for one advisor is not typical for what we look at. And I know the program has shifted, and it sounds like it's shifted for good reason now that we've done with advisory. But whereas in the past, we may have had more Unite mentors who came out of Ignite, who maybe have had other leadership training, we may be developing more new leaders. So it may require a little bit more mentoring, which I think is wonderful because we have a lot of capable students who, could really benefit from more opportunities. Personally, I would like to see 2 people for that many students going forward. I mean, I would like to personally maybe approve this for this year and then maybe come back next year and see where you are. Yeah. That's kind of where I am.
Yeah, that's totally reasonable. And trust me, I wish we had 2 people as well. And I'm sure Connor wishes we had 2 people as well. But to my earlier point, I just think there's a lot going on, and we're asking teachers to focus on teaching in so many different models, and it's no one's fault. It's just a lot, and that's a big club to take on, and it's a big responsibility. So, I think I'm perfectly okay if next year we put it out again to the staff, and if we get another advisor, then coming back to the table and splitting it back to 1,500 apiece, if we can do that. I just think given the circumstances this year, he's gone above and beyond with the group of students. So I'd like to reward him for that.
Completely understandable. Yeah. And everybody I know is juggling so many things, working from home and kids in hybrid, and, not the teachers, but I mean, everybody everywhere is pretty much out straight at this. So the fact that he's willing to do this and he's done it for the year is phenomenal. But hopefully if things ever return to normal, it's a great club, and there may be another advisor in the wings that could help. So I guess I would see if the committee would consider funding the 3,000 for Mr. Zanini, or for this year, combining the stipends into one for this year, and maybe revisiting next year if Mr. Bishop finds that the case continues, that we only have one advisor, we can revisit it more permanently then. If so, I would entertain a motion to any effect. So motion by Meg to combine the stipends for this year for Mr. Zanini and revisit in the fall. So motion by Meg.
Second.
Second by Leah. All those in favor? Aye. Sorry. We do need a roll call. Leah?
Aye.
Joe?
Aye.
Meg?
Aye.
Nancy?
Aye.
And I'm an aye as well. So that would pass. So for this year, please express our gratitude to Mr. Zanini. This is in no way saying that we don't want him next year. We just want him to survive this year and have some help, maybe, if it's out there.
I think he'd love some help as well. So I really appreciate that. I'm sure he'll be very thankful. So thank you.
Great. And I believe, Mr. Bishop, you have one other agenda item.
I'm sorry, I'm taking a lot of your time. I apologize.
It's nice to see you. Go.
Yeah. Did I hear it was your birthday?
Not my birthday.
Oh, Leah's birthday, Leah.
Thank you.
Again, I'll try to be this is a little bit more complicated. I'll try to explain this as clear as I can. So,
sorry, Mr. Bishop, one second, just for the audience. We're on item B, end of first semester schedule change, Mr. Bishop.
Sorry about that. Yep. So we are proposing a change of date for our end of semester. As some of you may know, we wrap up our semesters with mid-year exams and final exams, and we have half days in order to do that. And so we have 2 exams per day, and then there's no other class on those days. And so I've been meeting with our scheduling committee, which is made up of a teacher in each one of our departments. I've also been having conversations with our department heads at our weekly, what we call the leadership team meeting, and also getting student feedback in our principal's cabinet. So typically principal cabinet is a group of 12 students. We've expanded this year. We have almost 100, and we have 3 different groups. We have a remote principal's cabinet, an orange day principal's cabinet, and a green day principal's cabinet. And so we've been talking a lot about the schedule, the semester, so I've gotten a lot of feedback on this. And so if we were to continue with our same model this year, because we're in the hybrid, we would have to go not only 4 half days, but 8 half days and stretch them out given the cohorts. And we are just losing a lot of class time. I think we all know we started 10 days late, and class time is so valuable. Having students be able to sit in front of their teachers is so critical. So we don't want to lose that time. And so we've had some conversations about what can we do in order to maximize our time in class. And what we came up with was this proposed kind of exam schedule and change of date. So right now, our semester ends on Monday, February 1st, and then the exams would start on the 2nd, which is a Tuesday, and run all the way until Thursday, the 11th. We don't have school on Friday, the 12th, and then it's vacation. So the second semester wouldn't start until the Monday we get back from February vacation. And if you start to look at the number of days first semester versus second semester, they're starting to get pretty uneven if that's the case. And so we talked to a lot of the teachers saying that, you know, if a teacher wants to give a summative assessment for a final class, if it was a semester class or a mid-year exam, they can still do that within their class period. We don't think we need to have half days and no class. So what we're proposing is that we kind of do away with the 4 or 8 half days this year. Teachers would be giving their summative or mid-year assessments within their class period. And the last day of the semester would actually be on Friday, the 29th of January, which happens to be a district half day. And so the second semester would start on a Monday, the 1st of February, on an A-day green. And so what we're also hoping to propose is that Thursday, the 28th, would also be an early release at the high school. So we'd be going from potentially 8 half days to 2. And the reason for the 2 would be for teachers on those days to be correcting those summative assessments and also preparing for second semester. So a lot of times in our art department, in our science departments, a lot of materials, a lot of things that have to be put together in order to get the second semester ready. So we'd really be going from 8 half days to 1, if you think about it, because 1 is already a district half day. And so we'd be really maximizing class time. And even on those half days at the end of January, they'd be in shorter classes. It wouldn't be exam period. So we'd be really making up some time that we may have missed at the beginning because we started 10 days late if we are not doing our traditional exam week and had class instead. So it's been pretty well received from all the different groups that I've spoke to, from students to staff, and a few parents that are on some of our committees. I think this will be something we'll revisit at the end of the year to see if this is something, obviously this is a strange year, it's different. And even at this point, a typical mid-year exam might have material on it that we haven't even got to yet, just because of this hybrid model. So there's a lot of reasons why this year, I think we can come up with a different model. But then, we'll continue to have conversations about next year if we go back to this model. So this is more as a kind of a this year, see how it goes. So we're really looking to kind of just change the end date of the semester and then shift around a half day to the January 28th. So going from 8 to 2. So happy, I know that might be confusing if you're not high school schedule people, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you have on it.
So I don't have any questions, but I love this idea. Sorry, apparently my dog does as well. I love this idea to maximize instruction time. I think it makes a lot of sense, and I appreciate it, that you brought it forward. So.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I like it. I think you're finding time in semester one for exams and then using what was reserved as exam time for more semester two class time.
Yep.
Yeah, I like it.
I'm not sure I understood much of what you said, Mr. Bishop, but generally I concur with everything you do. So you have my blessing on this.
Thank you, Meg. I appreciate that.
Leah, did you have to add, want to add anything?
No, I think it's a wonderful idea. I think they've done a really good job thinking through, and I know that in-person instruction time is something that a lot of our parents have been writing about. So anything that helps to increase it in a safe manner is a really good idea by my book.
Yeah, I love it too. I think it's an excellent plan for this year. I think I counted out, I was playing schedule fun myself. I was counting out days and it looked like the semesters were much more balanced this way actually because of the late start. I love that you once again asked the students because my question was always, gee, what do the finals count for? If you're in the, does it count for 50% of your grade? Well, for those who don't know, I think they tend to be capped at 10%. So it's not like, you might think, oh, well, I didn't have a great start to the semester. I'm hoping this final is going to save me. I mean, that's really not how we structure. We try to keep our learning more even. So, but I'm glad the students had an opportunity to weigh in. Of course, I asked that. Of course they did, but I asked anyway. I think it's great. My only comment to you, and I think you said teachers will likely do summative assessments in the class time. And, I just think summative assessments are so valuable. Like they're just, they give you that push to actually go synthesize that stuff you learned in the unit tests and the unit quizzes and so forth and really bring it all together and drive it home. And sometimes, I mean, personally, I found I actually really cemented learning, either preparing for the final or maybe not doing so well in the final and realizing afterwards what I didn't know, but then you know it. So, I hope there are some summative assessments built into the available time or as take homes or whatever.
Yeah, and I think there will be, and I think and we'll think creatively. There might be some exams that might be done asynchronously to maximize the class time. I think this also lends itself more to a little bit more project-based type of summative assessments, and so we're excited about it. I think that the teachers are excited about the more class time, and I think parents will be as well, and I think students will be. So I think it's a win-win, and we'll assess it at the end of the year to see if it goes well. But I agree with you, Amanda. I think the idea of mid-years and finals are really important, especially as we're getting students ready for that next level, because they're going to be facing those types of assessments. And so, cementing the learning, bringing it all together is all something that's really important. But I think we can do that within our current schedule and not have to do the half days. And I think it's gonna go well. But again, I'm happy to come back and talk to you a little bit how it goes if you have questions. But I think for this year, it makes the most sense.
Can I ask one more question, Amanda? Is that okay?
Oh, of course.
It just pops into my head because we do not provide transportation for the during exam period. I'm assuming, would we be able to provide transportation if we make this an early dismissal? I guess that might be more of a Susan question, but I know that can create some backlog at the on Hayden Row when we have a million cars picking up.
Yeah, we usually don't provide, students can stay in the building and study for their next day exam. And so usually we don't provide the 11:30 timeframe transportation home. So I don't know, Susan, if you think we would do that for that one day that we're adding, but we typically do not do that.
The middle school is still an issue, actually. I'm thinking that as
the only difference would be where, students are, which is tough to see because I feel students will stay at the high school years past till 4, 5, 6 o'clock at night. And we're just not seeing that this year because we're asking students to leave. So I don't know if on that half day, if we're going to let students stay in the building. I guess we'll see when we get to that point. So we would be asking them to leave and find their own transportation. So, but we haven't done that in the past.
Yeah, where it's a single day, maybe we can look into it. I mean, it's a single day and a single run.
And particularly, it would be nice if we don't want them hanging around in the building, if we could transport those who are not able to get.
Okay, I suspect you're going to get a lot of support for this, but I will entertain a motion on this.
So moved.
That you move to pass the schedule as presented. A motion by Meg.
Second.
Second by Leah. Now through a roll call vote. Leah,
Aye.
Joe,
Aye.
Meg,
Aye.
Nancy,
Aye.
and I'm an aye as well, and that passes unanimously as well.
Great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the support.
Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much. And
Mr.
I think that
Thank
concludes
you.
your agenda items. I don't know.
Done. Sorry to take so much of your time. It was really nice to see everybody.
Thank you so
Nice
much
to
for
see you.
coming.
Nice to see you.
Bye now.
Okay. All right. So going back up at the agenda, if you're following along at home, we are going to go to the superintendent's report. Dr. Kavanaugh.
And there we go. All right, so this is the superintendent's report for Thursday, December 3rd, 2020. On Monday, December 7th, so just 4 short days from now, we should be returning to our hybrid in-person learning. I know there's been a lot of conversation in the community. Why have we chosen to go remote for this week? You know, I'm sure that there are people out there who are wondering if we did this because we were worried about transmission of the virus. That is not why we did it. We have not seen any transmission, and I will knock on wood again, in our schools of the COVID-19 virus. We were lucky enough to be part of a webinar yesterday with Professor Allen from the Chan School of Public Health at Harvard University. He is in a place where he's advocating now for 3 feet of social distancing with masks and suggests that that's very safe. So it was certainly not because we were worried about transmission of the virus. The first reason that we did it is that the governor had a travel order or has a travel order in place. And the time frame from Thanksgiving, if we had people who were traveling, to Monday morning was really only Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, a 4-day window. So it will be very difficult, I think, for people who are traveling to get that requisite COVID-19 test, the PCR test, and show that they were negative. So we were concerned that there would be very low low attendance or high absenteeism on Monday and perhaps Tuesday and Wednesday of this week while we waited for that kind of maybe backlog of tests to be happening. So, you know, and we do have, you know, colleagues in other area high schools. You know, one of my colleagues had said that she had about almost a quarter of her high school faculty missing on Monday. So, I mean, in order to avoid that and to ensure that our teachers had at least, you know, the remote instruction and that they with their teachers, because they could all work remotely, there was no violation of the governor's order that way, we made the decision to do it. The second reason that we did that is that, you know, that over Thanksgiving, people were going to tend to be far more social than they would be in their typical lives. Masks off, visiting with family, visiting with friends, eating lots of food. And all of those things are the things that, you know, according to Professor Allen and according to what we know about this virus is what spreads the virus. So the prediction, and I am not a scientist, I don't have a crystal ball, I'm not a public health official, was that we were going to see a huge spike in COVID cases about a week after Thanksgiving. And if you looked at yesterday's cases in Massachusetts, we had at that point hit the highest number ever in Massachusetts at 4,613. And if you looked at today's numbers, they were astronomical, over 6,000. So, you know, right now we are seeing sort of the effects of Thanksgiving. What we were hoping was that if we could identify those students who were COVID positive, they wouldn't be in classrooms where other kids who were not COVID positive would have been determined to be close contacts. Now, at the elementary level, you can shut down a classroom and, you know, that seems to work okay because, you know, 12 kids, 20 kids will just go remote for the week. But at the high school level, it's very, very different. So at the high school, what will happen is if I have a COVID positive student in his English class, his math class, his science class, his social studies class, foreign language, the cafeteria, the bus, a study hall, in every one of those places, there are students who are sitting within 6 feet of him, and all of those kids become close contacts. Given, you know, the unknown, how many students would be COVID positive, the number of close contacts, the potential for that was astronomical. And, you know, so when we were looking at that, we thought, not only would we have to close down this week, but if we started to have so many close contacts that were forced to quarantine, we may in fact need to. And then close contact siblings are also required to as well for a period of time until the close contact tests negative. So we could have very widespread absenteeism. So that was the goal in, transitioning to remote just for this week. So back to school on Monday, everybody, in the hybrid in-person model. All right, in my last superintendent report, I did talk a little bit about budget, and I'm kind of enjoying giving people a little bit of background about budget formation. For FY22, I had addressed two areas of uncertainty. We've talked about one of them tonight, which is enrollment. And the second one was the amount of money that we might need for PPE in FY22. At this point in time, we literally have $187,000 budgeted for PPE. Whether or not we will need that much hand sanitizer and paper towels and all of those things that are consumable, we don't really know. But that's where we are. So tonight I want to talk a little bit about that magical percentage 2.5, because we hear it all the time. We need to, stay to a 2.5% increase, a 2.5% impact. And it's very, very difficult to do that with school budgets. And I don't want you to think that this is unique to Hopkinton, because it's not. This is the way teacher salary schedules look all over the state of Massachusetts. So just so that we're familiar with the terminology, and I think that this is probably a good lesson for some of our folks at home. When we talk about the teacher salary schedule, we talk about steps, and what a step is, it's just an additional year of service. So if I taught for 5 years in Hopkinton, I'd be standing on step 5, and then I would advance to step 6. So we would call that a step raise. If I came into Hopkinton and I had a bachelor's degree, after I earned 15 credits past my bachelor's, I'd make a lane change to bachelor's plus 15. And after I got my master's degree, I would make a lane change to master's degree. And so those, we will call lane increases. And then finally, there's cost of living increases. So I will show you the teacher salary schedule in Hopkinton. Oops, one too many. All right, so what I've done is I've sort of created these fictional folks here. And this is our friend, Tommy Teacher. Tommy Teacher has been in the district for 5 years. So our friend Tommy right now is standing on step 5. When he came to us, he only had a bachelor's degree, but he's a very hard worker. And the state tells him he's got to get a master's degree. So Tommy's working assiduously at that. And in his 5th year of service, he's right here at $63,689 on step 5. So the next year, he's going to get this step raise, absolutely positively, no matter what. And we know Tommy has also told the district he's going to earn his master's degree, and he has. So he's going to not only move down 1 step, but he's going to move over 1 lane. You'll see that BA 30 and master's are the same thing. So he'll go from 63,689 essentially to 69,997. When he makes his step raise, it's a 4.5% raise. And when he jumps with his step and his lane increase, he's got a 10% raise. And if our friend Tommy sticks around in the district and the teachers get a 2% raise for the following year, our friend Tommy will have gotten 11% worth of raises, because this 69,997 will turn into $71,397 for the following year. So essentially, one teacher in the middle of this salary schedule can be poised to make an 11% raise from one fiscal year to another. We know that salaries make up the majority of our budget. As Mrs. Rothermick points out, every year, salaries are about 80% of the school budget. So if one single teacher is getting an 11% raise, it's really hard to say that you're going to be able to keep to a 2.5% raise. And I know that as we look at Tommy, where he's poised here to do both a step and a lane, and then perhaps a COLA, he's in a very good place. But let's talk about our friend Tina Teacher. Tina Teacher has been in the district now. She's celebrating her 20th year in the district. She has a master's degree and 30 additional credits beyond that. So right now she sits on what we would call the top step, $98,653. You can see that there are no more steps. She's at the top step. And at this point in time, Tina Teacher is not ready to advance to master's plus 45. So she's right here. If there is no cost of living raise, then Tina would get no raise whatsoever going from FY21 to FY22. And I'll talk a little bit about that in just a moment. If there's a 2% COLA, Tina would go from her $98,000 to $100,626,000. $626. So let's take a look at a summary for Hopkinton. If we take a look at where our teachers are, 40% of our teachers are not on a top step. So when I was describing what does it look like in that middle where people are making step and lane changes, 40% of our 350 roughly teachers would be able to make certainly a step raise, if not a step in a lane. And the average increase between steps is 4.22%. We have 162 teachers who have said absolutely positively they're going to make a lane change this year. So if we take the 140 teachers who would be in this 40% and the 162 teachers who would be in the lane change group, essentially you've got about 300 places where you're going to have people who can move a box, whether that's down a step or over a lane. And the average lane increase, the average lane increase is 4.73%. So you've got 300 spaces, maybe not necessarily teachers, because some of those people could be the same. They could be going down a step and over a lane, but 300 movements of either 4.22% on average or 4.73% on average. So what you're seeing here really is that 6/7 of, the workforce, so to speak, is going to be above that 2.5%. So mathematically, it becomes really impossible to keep your budget at that 2.5% increase if 80% of your budget is made up of salary. So I just wanted to point that out because we always keep hearing, we have to keep it to 2.5%, but the way teacher salary schedules are built, and again, I want to underscore, this is not necessarily a Hopkinton thing. While you see on this screen right now, the summary for Hopkinton, this is what salary schedules look like all over the state of Massachusetts. So in very rough budget years, what happens is when people say you've got to keep it to 2% or 2.5%, and they start doing like sort of that very widespread elimination of personnel. I mean, that's why we get to those places. So I just want the community and, people, even within our organization, the school committee, to really have a good picture of what raises look like for teachers. And, there's that slow incremental thing where you're not going to reach that maximum salary until you've been teaching for 13 years. It's a very long time before you reach that top step. And clearly you're investing a lot of money on the way to get to masters plus 15, masters plus 30, masters plus 45, masters plus 60.
Dr. Kavanaugh, I'm just going to pause for just a second because I know you're going to switch to another topic.
Sure.
Are there any clarifying questions? We don't have to have a lot of debate here, but I just want to make sure there's a lot of material. So if anyone has any clarifying questions, please ask.
Yeah, no, just a comment, and it's not going to be helpful really, but it just doesn't work this way in other parts of the economy. We've hamstrung ourselves. Right. We value our teachers. We love our teachers, don't get me wrong, and we should compensate them very well. But this makes it very difficult for communities to fund. And as a result, communities have to do unnatural things like excessive amounts of economic development and construction and things like that to try to raise taxes to cover it. It's not, in my view, sustainable. Again, I don't have a solution, but this to me is part of the problem. I really appreciate you going through it though.
Yeah, and I guess just to sort of talk a little bit about, if you look at these step one salaries, they are, low for professional people. I mean, to think that someone would be coming out of school, say, for example, brand spanking new, but with a master's degree, that's not an enormous salary. And it does take a while for them to get here. But I think, Joe, you're right in the sense of steps and lanes incrementally produce high percentages, things that, are challenging to fund.
Yeah, this is salary only. If you look at the lifetime impact of these salaries and you factor in the benefits, it's a whole lot more than private sector.
Yeah. So, again, just in terms of the budget, things like enrollment is tricky, PPE is tricky, thinking about, how that magic number is not necessarily an attainable number. We have to think very hard as we work through budget season. And I just like to keep us, thinking about where some of the, the harder pieces of budgeting lie. All right, so to switch gears, we have talked a little bit in our last meeting. Mrs. Rothermick and I talked about school start times, and you know that the district is considering transitioning to 2 tiers of busing, and one of the impacts of that is that we would be able to alter our start times. So if we did have 2 tiers of busing, one for the high school, middle school, and then another for the 3 elementaries, and these times are sort of really at a 30,000 foot level right now, but roughly we would be looking at something like 8 to 2:30 for high school and middle school and 9 to 3:30 for the 3 elementary schools. Obviously we're not down to the actual minutes, but that's kind of the look. But in order to do this, we do think it's a complicated piece because we would like to put together a group of people to have some serious conversations about this process. We don't know how this would impact families who have multiple children in multiple buildings, as well as, sort of before care and after care. We hear a lot about sleep issues for teens, and we genuinely don't know if, pushing out the start time from, asking our kids really to be entering the building between 7 and 7:15 to be doing that between 7:45 and 8 o'clock. We don't know how this interferes with after school activities when we're thinking about, sort of kids at the middle school and high school levels. What does that do to clubs? What does it do to athletics? What does it do to kids who work part-time jobs? How does that work with extra help sessions, kids who stay after school for, with a teacher for help? And we believe that our current fleet of buses will be able to meet the district's needs in 2 runs, but we're not sure, again, about how that might impact ride time. So, essentially, if you're looking at a fleet of buses for Hopkins and Marathon because of their proximity to each other, and then a fleet of buses for Elmwood, would the Elmwood buses be required to, make a pretty substantial coverage of the acreage and the mileage of Hopkinton? So I just wanted to update people as to where we are on that, and just to have more conversations in the future about this, because I do think it's an important topic, and we can really talk about whether or not there's a cost savings along with these changes in tiers and changes in start times. Okay, still moving. I want to remind families that students have to have an influenza vaccine on or before 12/31/20. I know families are working toward that now, and if I could just make a request that families do that sooner rather than later. Right now, our nurses are, taking all of those verifications that people have, in fact, had their kids immunized against the flu. And those things all go into, some storage vessel somewhere. And we're just, kind of worried that if we wait till the very end, the nurses are going to sort of be spinning and trying to get that together. Naturally, it's within everyone's prerogative to wait until the 31st, but if anyone had it in their heart to help our nurses by doing it sooner rather than later, we would appreciate that. Also, a reminder, please remember that even though Thanksgiving has passed, and we've talked a lot about the COVID-19 travel order, it is still in effect. And so what that means is that when you come back, you're quarantining for 14 days, or you're producing a negative COVID-19 result that has been administered up to 48 hours prior to your arrival in Massachusetts or upon your arrival in Massachusetts. And I know this might seem like a strange phenomenon, but even if you are, visiting your grandmother out of state, or you go skiing outside of Massachusetts, or you just do one of those things that is, your grandmother is in your bubble. When you go skiing, you're not really interacting with anyone while you're skiing down that slope all by yourself, and it's in the outdoors, and it seems to be one of those favorite activities. That actually does qualify under the governor's travel order. So if people could, sort of try to remember what kinds of things qualify, that's really important. All right, and I know that we have also heard from, and we can spend some time on this slide and have some discussion about it, but we've heard an awful lot from parents who are in favor of a full-time in-person reentry. And, I can tell you, attending that webinar, and I know I said it just a few moments ago, but there is a great big push that says in classroom settings with masks on, there's no reason why students cannot be within 3 feet of each other. They are looking at European models where the meter was sort of the measurement. Dr. Allen will say that, we talked so much about when, people are talking and sneezing and laughing and eating, droplets get into the air. And we kept thinking, well, they wouldn't travel further than 6 feet. They do, but they do not with your mask on. So 3 feet with the mask, you should be okay, according to Professor Allen. We do know things. We know that isolation is bad for kids. I hear from parents all the time saying that, this whole remote learning thing, the asynchronous day, being trapped in the house is just terrible. And parents will say, I am grateful for the hybrid day that I get, but how I wish my children could be in school every day. Our masks, we know that they have been effective. I've said it once before already tonight. I'll say it again. There has been no in-school transmission of the virus, as far as we know. And if you've been listening to Charlie Baker, the governor has been arguing very much in favor of that sort of full-time reopening. Just get our kids in school, and we hear that. A very, very quick return. So people will say, so can we just come back on January 4th? And we have to realize that there are some obstacles to that, but that doesn't mean that we won't get back in this school year. But I think that we need to put a reentry planning group together to really think about how that's going to look. And I think we'll be doing that during our meeting on the 17th of December. But why is that quick return not so feasible? I don't think people realized when we were preparing to open in a hybrid model this summer, our custodial staff literally picked up and moved thousands, literally like thousands of pieces of furniture. At the high school alone, to put furniture back into our classrooms, we're talking over 700 desks that would need to be moved. But there's, a whole lot of other things that would have to happen, to get furniture back in places. You may have noticed that in our elementary schools, we have storage facilities. So many things have been stored away. So that would take a very long time. Another thing that would take a long time, and I'm hoping that Linda Henderson and Lisa Cardy aren't listening to this right now, because if they hear this, they'll probably, they'll be preparing their resignations. But in terms of scheduling, our IT people have had to take Power School and Schoology and create all of these sort of class settings, orange cohorts, green cohorts, and when kids are meeting for special education and when they're meeting for ESOL and when they're meeting for OT and PT and speech. And all of that's going to have to sort of be readjusted to some extent. So we're going to have to take classes and put them back together and switch times for some of those pull-out services. That takes, I know it doesn't seem like it should, but it takes an enormous amount of time when you're talking about 4,000 kids, and especially when you're talking about 1,000 students at the high school. We still have that obstacle of lunch, but I'm thinking that if we get to March and we're thinking about leaving the athletic center or our gyms and our cafeterias and our tents and all the space that we can possibly find, if people are comfortable with a 3-foot social distance in the classroom, I think we could possibly be able to also do about 4 feet at lunch. So, and that's just a number I'm throwing out there off the top of my head. I don't want to be, that to be carved in stone, but lunch is still a concern because kids have to have their masks off to eat. It's just a fact. And then right now we do have that current spike in the virus. So, you can bring everybody back, but how many people would be putting out as close contacts? I mean, it doesn't really make sense to be bringing loads of kids in on January 4th and then have so many students who are COVID positive that we're sending out 1 COVID positive kid and 12 kids who are just close contacts and 15 kids who are siblings of close contacts. So it becomes, sort of this domino effect, I guess, if you will. And the last thing that I will say is people have been very, very grateful and very thoughtful and thought about alternative locations for education. And I think what they don't realize is that the 700 pieces of furniture that we're talking about, in storage facilities would have to be moved into the new location. You'd have to do some rerouting of your buses, which is, kind of it's a very big deal. If you look at the DESE website, you can't, and I don't know if the standards are relaxed for COVID. We'd have to do some research on that. But there are, fire standards and cafeteria standards, and we'd have to move in custodians, we'd have to move in nurses, we'd have to move in, because you can't have a school without a nurse in it. And you'd be moving in your cafeteria people, and would that mean more hiring? So it's very, very tricky to take on an alternative location. I think that if it were July and we were thinking about it, I'd feel a whole lot better about it. But where, we're talking about maybe a March, April, May, hopefully, fingers crossed, kind of a full-on reentry, and that's for a group to decide. But I don't know that we would get into an alternative location much quicker than that, to be honest.
Is that a pause?
That's a pause for comments, yeah.
Okay. I'm sure there are some comments. Does anyone have any comments? Questions?
I mean, I hear all of these points and I understand them. I just also know, after listening to some parents last night, that there is a lot of eagerness for kids to come back full time. I think with, things like the furniture, if you just ask parents to help, I bet you they would move the entire town to a different town over the course of the weekend if it meant their kids could go back to school. So I don't think that some of these obstacles are insurmountable.
Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Yeah, I agree. Like, I'm listening to the desks, doable. I know it's hundreds. Believe me, we heard over the summer and we congratulated Tim on the great work. The IT scheduling, I know it's a pain, but I mean, our mission is to educate the kids. That's our mission. And as you know, we're all on board. And what I don't feel in these discussions is, like, we should be talking about the road to reentry. And instead, it always feels like the obstacles to reentry. We all know there's obstacles on the road to reentry, but I want to look at solutions to those obstacles. And I think that's what we owe our kids. We as school committee, as administration, as teachers, together, we need to figure out a solution for our kids. That's my perspective. And I think it's a mindset shift of what's the road to reentry. And I think if we have a will, we will find a way. I heard that somewhere.
Yeah, and I don't want you to feel that I am being obstructionist to this. And I think that's why we're putting this group together on December 17th. But I do want to be sensitive to the people who work in our organization. And I respect the fact that, parents certainly would be gracious enough to move furniture and those kinds of things. But I can't ask custodians to move 700 pieces of furniture while I'm also asking them to clean the cafeteria and clean every classroom and disinfect every room. Like, we've got to remember that they have their regular nightly and daily jobs alongside this kind of work, which is, it's grueling work. And I think we have to remember.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I'm just being sensitive to my personnel.
I get it. We're all in this together. We're sensitive to the families too. They have their regular jobs that some of them have left in order to be home with their kids. So we're all in this together. And I know we all have the right objectives in mind. If we just figure out what the problems are, I think we can overcome it. But I appreciate you starting to outline some of the specifics. It's helpful.
So can I ask a question about the reentry group? Are we looking, are you looking at a group sort of similar to what we had over the summer? Potentially, I know it's complicated in a lot of regards, but are we also going to look to survey the community in a similar way that we did last summer?
So I think with the group that we had last summer, we had 36 people, and it was, we were certainly a very productive group, but we were concentrating on things like, we had a health and safety group, we had a transportation group, we had a curriculum group for elementary, a curriculum group for middle school, a curriculum group for high school. So I don't necessarily know that we need to address all of those areas again, because I think that we have a handle on what those things look like if you go back to regular old ordinary everyday in-person learning. I do, however, think that we need to bring in people who are going to be immediately impacted. And while I hear a lot too from parents who are very eager to get their kids in, I've gotten several emails, this week from people who have said, with the uptick in the virus, can we just please close until Martin Luther King Day and see where we are? So, we have to remember that there are a lot of unique voices. So I do think, some parent group would be important, but I think the most important groups here might be our building principals, the teachers, and obviously, families. But I think that, who's going to be the people who are going to have to do the work to make this happen?
Absolutely. And the impact on the working conditions that this would have and how we can best make our teachers and our staff comfortable while maintaining safety and making sure that we're providing for the best education we can.
Yes, absolutely.
I always want to acknowledge too that in any model that I'm talking of, we're assuming, without always mentioning, it should include elective remote, because there's always going to be the need in the short run for accommodating that as well. But thank you.
Yes,
do you see any feasibility in, in your opening remarks on the superintendent's report tonight, Dr. Kavanaugh, you mentioned, the different age level studies and things like that. Is there any, maybe this is for the reentry task group that you're starting to talk about, but would there be any possibility of kind of grade tiered differences in reentry level, for example? Maybe it's more feasible at lower grades than higher or something like that.
Well, I'll tell you what makes it more feasible at the elementary level is the quarantining process. So because every elementary classroom is considered to be a cohort, if one student is COVID positive in a classroom, it's really only going to impact, in this situation, it impacts about 9 others because we might have 10 there. If we bring everybody back, it's going to impact an entire a group of 20, and they'll all have to go home for remote learning. But at the high end, and of course, if they have siblings across the district, they'll have to go home as well. I mean, that piece doesn't go away. But at the high school level, it gets very, very tricky because one student in 7 classes and a ride in the bus and a seat in the cafeteria and, maybe an athletic team, that could produce 30 kids who are all close contacts. And if those 30 each have a sibling, we've got 60 kids who are wiped out immediately from coming to school every day.
Yeah, I just want to sort of pick up on Nancy and Joe's comments about the survey for one thing. I think this came up last night in office hours, and I'll talk more about that in my report, but there was a suggestion, I think it might be relevant to see where people are. There may be the people who elected remote may continue to elect remote, and that may provide an ability in some schools for us to accommodate the smaller population. We don't know what it looks like, so it might be worth asking the community, if we were to reopen, would you stay with elected remote or would you come in full-time in person? So I'd like to just plant or second the idea of maybe surveying the community again. And I also like the idea of maybe starting, again, for the reentry group to consider, but phasing, where we start with the easiest scenario, maybe at one elementary school even, to just one that we think is easiest to accommodate based on space, based on whatever. And maybe when we do this, we might not do it as one monolith. We might do it just one school or one level of learning at a time.
Yeah, so I think we just need to be cautious about surveying remote families who may want to come back. And the reason for that is if you are an elementary school aged 2nd grader, for example, who's been in the same classroom with the same children and the same teacher all year, and then suddenly you decide that you want to come back, you are a kiddo who's going to be put into an in-school setting with no knowledge of who the teacher is, who the kids are, what the routines are, how any of this works. But the other piece is, there's a big worry that if the in-person class sizes got too big because so many remote kids wanted to come in, we may have to actually break down an entire remote classroom, shift some of the kids who want to stay remote into other classrooms, and then let some of those remote class kids who wanted to come in person come in. So I guess I may have gone a very long way to say that kind of disruption for elementary school kids is not good. It's not good to have classes just break down and you lose all your familiar peers and you lose your familiar teacher. So we do need to be cautious of that.
So most likely, it is difficult to reabsorb someone who's been in a different track with a different teacher with a different class that's fully remote. Yeah.
Yes, and at the high school level, we have said to folks that if you are taking a VHS or a tech course and you're part of that remote group, you do need to stay in it. There's no way for us to say, okay, we've shelled out $90,000 in these remote classes, and if you come back, we're just going to move you right into a Hopkinton class of your choice because you would have missed all of that previous instruction.
Yep. A lot of considerations. A lot of these questions came up last night, so it's good to go through the detail. A lot of considerations. So on the 17th, we'll be launching or identifying or launching a task force. Is the plan?
Yes, we will. Yeah.
And do you know how many parents will be invited to be on this task force?
I don't. Last time, and it was really interesting. Last time we did this, we just asked parents if they were interested in doing it and just to explain a little bit about, why they thought that they were interested in doing it and talk a little bit about their credentials. I mean, we expected to take about, 4 or 5 parents on the summer group. And then as we looked at some of the sort of amazing perspectives people were going to bring, like we had some folks, who had a PhD in virology. And I'm thinking, how do you let somebody with a PhD in virology not help inform the process when, what we're dealing with here is a virus that's just, a worldwide pandemic. So that person had to be helpful to us in some way. Or people who at, the college level had already gone through the process once. And, so those people had interesting people who had children who had, some kind of health compromise that would have put those children in real danger. Those were good voices to hear.
That's great. Yeah, I hope there'll be a nice showing of parents here.
Mm-hmm.
I would guess there's probably no shortage of people with opinions that would want to be part of that group.
Yes. Yes, and probably not dissimilar from last summer. There'll be some people who are very excited to be on our group and some who are very disappointed not to be. So. All right.
Is that it?
That's all.
That is.
Dr. Kevin, do you have the chair report slides?
I do indeed, yes. So I
think that's where we are.
Mm-hmm.
Check it. Yeah.
There we go. Oops.
Thank you. So community engagement, just summarizing, and this is none of this is now going to be new information, but I do want to quickly share this and what came out of the office hours, because I think it is important for the other committee members who were not on office hours and for the community to know what the conversations have been with us over the last week or so. So in terms of emails, we have had several about full in-person reopening. We had one about please stay remote because the case counts are surging. We had one asking about our participation in the DESE rapid testing program of phase 1, which Hopkinton is not participating in by choice. And we had an email about the fact that hospitals, particularly Milford, someone worked there, is currently inundated with cases and really overwhelmed with the case surge and concerned about being in person in schools. We had an email about the concern about the impact on students and special education services because of this shift to fully remote for Thanksgiving. And someone who was just frustrated with how unfair the shift seemed because they had made personally so many sacrifices to stay home and stay isolated. And it was, another reminder that we are all connected in this and our decisions impact other people. So next slide. So last night we had office hours and Meg and I manned manned the conversation. And I really want to thank the people who participated. There was a lively discussion, largely centered on reopening. And I've just highlighted some of what was asked. These are not my questions. This is what came up. So someone talked about there's no school spread, masks are effective. Why can't we at least open the elementary schools in person? We're okay with it not being 6 feet of social distance because masks work. Can we do another survey? I've already voiced that one. One parent was raving about the remote experience that her child is getting. She just chimed in with a voice of happiness, which was nice. We had a parent concerned about how well special education works in remote and wondering if we switch to full-time remote, if that we could still have, maybe do some services for the special ed kids. We had a question about if we do go to fully remote, can we merge our cohorts, orange and green, together? We had a question about, are we going to go fully remote again after Christmas and February break? So some parents want to be able to know what those disruptions might look like. And I did share that a lot of our decision for this current week was based on the travel ban, and we don't know if there'll be a travel ban or what things will look like. But parents are hoping that if we anticipate a shutdown after Christmas and after February break, that we articulate that early. And one parent suggested the use of space at Dell or other businesses, which you've already addressed as well, Dr. Kavanaugh. So we can switch to the next slide. One person said, we talked a little bit about how districts have approached full-time reopening differently, and there have been some cases where high schools have remained fully remote in order to enable elementary schools to be fully in person. And this particular parent said, I really want the elementary schools in person, but I don't want to give up my hybrid for my high schooler because that secondary education is a critical time. So I think this task force will have a lot of conversations, probably to weigh the pros and cons of different models. A lot of questions about whether, if you're currently remote, you can switch to in-person if we move to in-person. And I think, Dr. Kavanaugh, you've just shared some of the complexities of doing that. We'd love to do it, but there's a lot to consider about where you are in your progression for your courses, what it does to the class composition, etc. So probably difficult to do. One Marathon Elementary parent had actually a different thing to add, and actually asked about simplifying the communications about classroom activities. It's all coming through email, which for a lot of parents, our emails are just full of, it's work, it's advertising, it's class materials. And he was just wondering if there was some kind of an app or portal that could be used just for classroom communications. And I suggested he check back with his teacher. There was a question about, will we get rid of February break? Might we do that? A question about quarantining guidelines and some confusion about what you have to do if you're a contact of a contact, which we deferred back to the Board of Health for clarity. And another question about whether we are participating in rapid testing. Meg, did I miss anything significant?
No, you hit every nail on the head, Amanda, as
Okay.
ever.
And the ironic thing was, so we got off the call, it was about an hour and a half for office hours, and there in my inbox is a Boston Globe article. So I don't know if you've seen this or you haven't seen it. I did link to it here, but you can look it up if you like. There was a Boston Globe article that came out yesterday, and it pretty much encapsulated everything that we talked about around reopening. And I pulled out a few themes that were highlighted in the article that also came up in our discussion. There's inconsistent messaging. One of the things that was stated in the article is that we have two competing and wildly conflicting narratives. One is Governor Baker, recognizes the need to reopen for the sake of students and learning and wellness. On the other hand, we have an alarming surge of a second wave. So, it's a complicated environment in which we're living. There are complicating circumstances for reopening, crowded classrooms, bus contracts, agreements that were forged with teachers based on what we knew in August. And those have to be, in some cases, renegotiated. And there have been staffing issues that Dr. Kavanaugh has alluded to. Finding substitutes is very hard right now. Quarantining can put a real drain on the district when you can't find substitutes. So that's another set of circumstances. And also another theme is safety protocols. I mean, we don't know what we don't know, but it seems like the mix of safety protocols in our schools, the masks, the social distance, et cetera, have at least maybe helped eliminate school spread. We don't know. We feel like masks are the number one thing, but in the middle of a surge, a lot of superintendents are feeling uneasy about taking any of those safety protocols away because we're not sure which ones might break the system. We have the hand sanitizer. We have a whole suite of things that we're doing, and as we relax some of those, are we putting our district in a compromised position during a surge? So if anyone's out there, here's a plug for the Boston Globe. It was a really good article, quoted a few superintendents and quoted things that Dr. Kavanaugh has circulated in the district as well. So it's worth sort of reading to kind of get that sort of broad view of this reopening discussion. Next slide. And then there's the sort of everyday. I signed 2 expense warrants and a payroll warrant, and also a document to allow the MSBA to reimburse us for a marathon. And that's it for that. Any questions on the chair report? Okay. Liaison reports.
I have a quick one.
Great.
The Youth Commission met last night, and they're doing a new collaboration with the Hopkinton Community Partnership, and they are collecting new toys for kids. That they're seeing, not just Hopkinton, but I think everywhere, that there are many more families who are in need and far fewer resources because nonprofits, particularly larger ones, are there's a decrease in what is being donated to them. So they're collecting toys, and they're also collecting gift cards, which I think I mentioned at another meeting previously. And the gift card collection will continue on, but it's, any size gift card meant to alleviate different needs that families have. And then those gift cards will be available for like guidance counselors to be able, if they identify needs, that to be able to reach out to them, as well as our town social workers and others in town. So be on the lookout for the flyers I know one of the drop-off locations for the toys is going to be at Marty's. I don't off the top of my head know how many more they've identified since last night. So.
Great. Sounds like an excellent partnership. Any other liaison reports? I don't have any. Okay. Office hours, we will post the next set when we figure it out. It'll be soon. We don't know yet. So moving right along. So new business, we've already done Unite end of semester. That brings us to item C, the collective bargaining subcommittee. And I am seeking a vote from the school committee to empower a subcommittee to engage in collective bargaining with the HTA to establish the next contract. Their contract, as the community may be aware, expires at the end of this year. So we need to engage in collective bargaining, and the school committee needs to create a subcommittee for that. I believe the subcommittee members, hold on, would include myself, Nancy Kavanaugh as the assistant chair, Dr. Kavanaugh and Ms. Parson and Ms. Polnick from HR, Ms. Rothermick from Finance, and Michelle McNulty, who is our legal counsel. So I am seeking a motion to create that subcommittee.
So move. Sounds like a great team.
Motion by Meg.
Second.
Second by Joe. And I need to do a roll call vote. I also need to mention that Leah had to step off the meeting. So she left earlier, will not be part of the vote. She's absent for the minutes. So roll call, Nancy.
Yes.
Meg?
Yes.
Joe? I'm sorry, Joe, we didn't hear you. And Josie, yes, and I'm an I as well. And so that passes 4 and 1 absent. Thank you. Okay, and that brings us to school committee self-evaluation. I had mentioned at a previous meeting the idea of doing a self-evaluation as a school committee. It's a best practice from MASC, and I asked the committee to consider whether this is something you want Joe and I, as the procedures working group, to tease out. So you've had a little time to think about it. I don't know if this is something that we think is valuable or not. I will say that in the whole workings of the district, I think the school committee may be one of the few organizations that is not currently evaluated. Other than by vote every 3 years, we have members voted in and out. But you know, it is. I personally think that there is value in it if it's not done in a burdensome way and is done with a focus on what Hopkinton needs, and that would be something that the working group would have to put together. But it's something that we would all have to agree on. So how do you guys feel?
You know, I think that the idea of a self-evaluation can be really great, but I think this year is an odd year to do that. With all that we have faced over the past 9 or 10 months, and the fact that 2 of our terms are about to expire, it just doesn't seem to me to be the right time.
I think the idea is to develop the procedure first. It's a little bit hard in that we haven't set a set of norms. It's hard to then evaluate this year anyway, because we'd be identifying halfway through what we wish we had been evaluated on as of, July. So it might be a matter of just establishing the process so that we're ready to go in July of next year.
So the process, you mean a little bit like the grids that you created to show us last time?
No, I mean the actual, I'm just spitballing here because we would be a working team, but Joe and I would probably sit down and say, how would we approach a self-evaluation? There are some recommendations from MASC, but there are also, we might want to simplify things and focus on, things in our district. Maybe in the same way that Dr. Kavanaugh has identified a set of indicators. Maybe in July, we identify a set of indicators, we being whoever's on school committee, identifies a set of indicators, target areas for the coming year. And then the procedure would be saying just that, saying that as of July, the committee would identify, a set of indicators, and this is how they would do the self-assessment. And again, I don't want to jump to the answer because that would be the work of the working group. But the question is, do you think it is something valuable? And if not, that's fine. But if you think it would help keep us focused on priorities, then it's something to consider. Nancy?
So I think it would be an awkward time to go ahead and complete the whole thing at the midpoint kind of forward in the year, but I think it's probably makes sense to identify the process so that we're ready to do it, as we come into the new school year. I mean, not school year, but, the new July, August, whenever we're going to start to kind of identify the indicators, and I think makes sense to align them with, other things going on in the district. I suspect it would take probably a little bit of time for you and Joe to put that together anyway, to get through the meat of it.
And Joe and I may well get together and talk about it and say, this doesn't seem like it's going to be worth it. I'm just, I don't want to call working group meetings for nothing. So
worth the conversation to kind of see where, it does, even if it's not, right now or right this year, it does make sense to have the process in place so that we can look at ourselves and figure out, where we're doing well and kind of where we want to move forward in other areas. So.
Joe, do you have a thought and that you would be on the working group?
Sure. Yeah, I wanted to hear first, but sure. I think that we could make it meaningful, especially if, self-evaluation. Some people might fear, oh, we're going to say we did a great job, but I would look for things, for example, that in our self-evaluation, it would require, the procedure would require that we have feedback from, different segments of the community, including the administration that we work with so closely, and parents, for example. We would not just be giving an arbitrary subjective view of self-evaluation, but we would look for some outside input to it as well. And I think we could do it, Amanda, without taking up too much distraction from other important things going on. over the next couple months.
Well, let's have a conversation and see if it seems to be holding water. And if we have a conversation, the more we talk about it, it seems to sort of not seem important to us, then we can bring that back to the committee.
Can I just echo what Joe just said? I love the idea of getting outside feedback from, somebody that sees us and kind of takes away some of kind of our bias of we're doing what we're doing because we think it's right in the moment, but to have more objective feedback.
Yep, good idea.
360 view.
Okay, so we'll bring something back. I'm not promising when. It's December, it's busy, but it's on the docket. And Joe, I'll set up a meeting. Okay, that brings us to future agenda items. Does anyone have future agenda? We have a lot of things actually targeted for December 17th already. I think that's going to be a long meeting, but any other agenda items that we have missed or that are on your minds? Okay, well, we meet next week, so you can think about it and bring them back next week. Items by consensus, Dr. Kavanaugh.
All right, as superintendent, I recommend the school committee approve the items by consensus as outlined in your agenda.
So moved.
Motion by Nancy.
Second.
Second by Meg. I'll do a roll call vote. Joe?
Aye.
Meg?
Aye.
Nancy?
Aye.
And I'm an aye as well. And that passes. And I am looking for a motion to adjourn.
Oh, yes.
Motion by Meg.
Second.
Second by Nancy. Joe, how do you vote?
Aye.
Meg?
Aye.
Nancy?
Aye.
And I'm an aye as well. And we are adjourned at, what time is it? I don't even know. 9:30. I apologize for the lateness. Thank you, Ms. Rothermick and Ms. Parson and Dr. Kavanaugh for sticking out the late night. And we will see you soon.
Nighty night.
Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Thank you. Bye.